All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming Tom Hubbard to the Eastern Campus. Tom's work is stunningly wide-ranging and eclectic, and he's an accomplished literary scholar, poet, and novelist. His most recent work is a collection of poetry written chiefly in the Scottish dialect, the Shigall-Winnicks, which has actually just come out. This is the American launch of the book.
It is? Uh-huh.
No one else has seen this book yet, so you're the first to see it. So this has just come out, and he'll be reading from it today. We're lucky to be getting a first glimpse of this work. Other poetry he has written has appeared in several reviews on the continent, in Scotland, and in other places. And in 2008, he published Marie B., a novel recounting the life of a young French-Ukrainian aristocratic woman, from which he will also be reading today. In addition to his fictional works, Tom has edited or co-edited anthologies of Scottish poetry and literature, and published a variety of scholarly, critical, and bibliographical works on Scottish writers and literary themes. Notable examples are Seeking Mr. Hyde, Studies in Robert Louis Stevenson, Symbolism, Myth, and the Pre-Modern, a comparative study of poetry and the visual arts in Baudelaire, Rilke, and MacDiarmid, and the catalog of the lending collection of the Scottish Poetry Library. In much of Tom's work, we see an active fascination with the multilingual and the cross-cultural, a fascination which seems both prompted by and an outgrowth of his extensive travels. These travels have taken him around the world, teaching Scottish literature to interested audience in Budapest, Grenoble, France, and of course the United States, here in Connecticut, where he is currently the Linwood Neog Distinguished Visiting Professor of Scottish Literature in the Department of English at UConn. Given his travels and varied pursuits, it is perhaps then not surprising that much of Tom's interests lie in exploring the relationship between Scotland and the wide world. His fiction and his scholarly work is rich with the possibilities and complexities of the connections between Scotland and the wide world beyond Scotland and Britain's borders, which has, for many wandering Scottish writers, provided both a home and a livelihood. In the short blurb in the back of Tom's novel, it states that Tom's ambition is to be both cosmopolitan and provincial. In this, which I think perhaps best sums up his work, he partakes of a very long and very Scottish literary tradition. So please welcome Tom Hubbard.
Pretty good work. Okay, good evening, everyone. Well, as Ken was saying, I'm reading from two books: the poetry, the Shigall-Winnicks, and the novel Marie B. This book comes with a CD, so if you haven't had enough of my voice this evening, if you want to buy the book, you can hear more of it and become more and more acquainted with this bizarre accent that I've got. I think a common thread in the various pieces that I'll be reading tonight is that they all tell a story of one kind or another. In my poetry, I like to give people a narrative. I like to tell a tale, because I think that poetry has its origins in narrative and story. If you think of the ancient epics like the Iliad and the Odyssey, the very beginnings of poetry, they're stories as well as poems. So I'm trying to bring what one might call a kind of lost art of narrative in poetry back into poetry. And there's a number of us around the world who are trying to do just that. So that's one common thread. The second common thread, the image of thread is, I suppose, appropriate in a town like this. This is, after all, Thread City. The pieces cover a wide range of cultures. If you go to the Thread Museum in Willimantic, I find that a fascinating place, because what they've got on display there are exhibition boards that tell you of the sheer ethnic diversity of Willimantic. And including the people who worked in the thread factory. So you can learn from there that there are people from Ukraine, from France, Germany, Hungary, even people of Scottish origin have settled in Willimantic. And I'm hoping to represent some of these cultures tonight. I was actually on this campus last Saturday, checking it out. I wanted to, if you like, case the joint. You know, if I'm doing a gig anywhere, I like to have some idea of the just the sheer the physical outlay of the place that I'm visiting, and I really find this an extremely impressive campus. It's a good looking place, Easton. As we would say in Scotland, it's bra, which is pretty much the same as the Swedish word bra, meaning it's pretty impressive. So I feel deeply honoured to be here as a guest writer. So we have a representation of European languages and cultures in both these books, and I'll be saying more about this later in the reading. And I suppose European culture affects American culture for better or worse, for possibly better and worse. The book of poems, which I'll be starting with, the book draws on the folklore of many countries, many European countries. There are also a great many translations in the book from the poetries of various European countries. Hence my reference to French and Hungarian and Ukrainian poetry. And the connections of these various ethnic groups to this town that we're actually in just now. The poems are in the Scots language. Scots is a language that is both akin to English, but is also divergent from it. In Scotland, we've actually got 3 literary languages. People can write in Gaelic if they come from the Highlands. Gaelic was once it was a Celtic language. Was once spoken all over Scotland, but is now pretty much restricted to the Highlands and Islands. Lowland Scots, which is what I write in, well, is spoken and written in the lowlands, in the area stretching from the southwest of the country right up to Aberdeen and the area around about Aberdeen, which is in the northeast of Scotland. And of course we do occasionally write in English as well. There's a glossary in the book, so it is possible to, well, my publisher has actually asked me to point out that you can use this book as a means of learning the Scots language. I think he's going to be marketing it, not just as a book of poetry, but as a means of getting into the language itself. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read a sampling of the poems in the book. What I'm going to do is start with a very practical English version, and then I will give you the actual poem in Scots. The first poem has to do with the old legend of Faust and Mephistopheles. In my part of Scotland, in Fife, we've got a number of legends that are very like those legends of the German scholar Dr. Faust. Maybe some of you have studied Marlowe's play Dr. Faustus, which is, of course, one of the most famous airings of this legend in literature. So you've got the great scholar Dr. Faust, who makes a pact with the devil, with Mephistopheles, the devil called Mephistopheles, by which, well, Faust has just spent so much of his life being a great scholar, writing many books, teaching many students. Well, there's a number of guys in this room who know exactly what it's like. I'm sure there are a few incipient Fausts in this very room. And he's devoted so much time to his studies and to his students that he hasn't really lived as a full human being. So that's when he reaches old age, he decides to make this pact with the devil, with Mephistopheles. And Mephistopheles is going to be able to introduce him to all these various pleasures of this life, which he denied himself during his long years as a scholar. So, according to this legend that this poem is based on, Faust challenges Mephistopheles to make a rope out of sand. And we have a lot of sand on the coast of Scotland. Because Mephistopheles has been taunting Faust. Well, come up with some task that you want me to perform, make them more and more difficult, and I, being the devil, I being Mephistopheles, I'll be able to carry out these tasks. So Faust asks him to make rope out of sand. So we'll start with the English version, and this is the devil speaking. See that fellow Faust? He gives me a hard time. He really pisses me off, the toffee-nosed, conceited creature that he is, always nagging at me to do the kind of work that's right against my nature. Says I to him, well, you're all for the working class, Faust. Now, these are fine words, but I'm going to be blunter. These schemes of yours are far above the heads of your average punters. Punters, Joe Sixpack, the ordinary Joe the plumber. There was a time when a stair that would unroll magically when somebody would go up and down it. And that was a great spectacle for the people. And then there would be some of my very best and brightest little devils parading through the town. Well, there was a time when that would serve the masses well for entertainment. Jesus, that was all they knew. That's before they had DVDs and the internet and all the rest of it. They're a lot better off now, but still they want today's equivalent. Like children, that if you gave them a choice of wine or cola, they would always choose whatever is sweetest. That is the way it's always been and always will be. Faust, my friend, you're an elitist. So I, Mephistopheles, I take the doctor down to the shore and scoop into his hand that which is unchanging as the people themselves, and common too, the sand. Look there, says I to him, for no two grains of sand will ever stick together. Each one will think itself unique, although we cannot tell one from the other. So, this Faust says to me that I'm a clever devil, many a wonderful thing I've achieved. Is there some job that I cannot do? He can't think of any. I'm sure, this is Faust talking, I'm sure that Mephistopheles is the most expert of experts at making me the finest rope from the grains of Scotland's sands. Well, it's enough to make the devil defect at last to God. I wove the sand and I kept on weaving it, but the stuff just wouldn't hold together. It makes an honest devil wish he'd just stayed at home in hell. So if Faust still wants his rope of sand, he can do it his goddamn self. And here it is in Scots. Mephistophelian balanced scherzo on ein Fife legend. See that boy Faust? He scunners me, the toffee nebbit crater. I on at me to do the work that's richt agin my nater. Says I, you're for the working folk. Fine words, Faust. I'll be blunter. These schemes of yours are far abin the head of your average punter. Time was a stair that would unrow as you'd gang up or down, a wailing of my pliskiest deals parading through the toon. Time was that served the masses well. Christ, it was all they kent. They're better off, but still they want the day's equivalent. Like bairns that gie them wine or juice, be sure they'll tak what's sweetest. It's as it was, and I'll be. Faust, son, you're an elitist. I took the doctor down the shore, and I scoop into his hand, which changeless as the folk their cell, and common tay, the sand. Look there, says I, for nae twa grains will ever bide together. Ilkane will think itself unique, though we canna tell in for the tither. This Faust says, I'm a clever deal, mony a fairly I've wrought. Is there some darg I canna do? He canna think o' aught. I'm sure that Mephistopheles is the dabbest o' dab horns at making me the finest rape for the grains of Scotland's sons. Well, it's in you to gar the deal defect at last to God. I wove, and still I better wove, but the stuffy wouldna hod. It gars an honest deal to wish he'd bear it hame in hell, Say if Faust still wants his ripper sond, he can date his bloody self. We come now to Rambo, of whom you may have heard. Have you heard of Rambo? Arthur Rimbaud was the bad boy of late 19th century French poetry. Rimbaud, not to be confused with another guy called Rambo. He gave up writing aged 19 and took up another career, gun running in North Africa. Probably got a lot of business just now when you think about it. So he gives up poetry as 19, and he's very good at giving us in his poetry the persona of the obnoxious teenager. So those of us who have ever been obnoxious teenagers in our lives, I don't know about the rest of you, but I was an obnoxious teenager. This poem that I'm going to read, this translation, is very much his revenge on the narrow-minded small town that he grew up in. It's a polemic against the sticks, a spirited adolescent who feels kind of repressed living in a small town. My translation sticks fairly to the original, but it updates it here and there. So we'll start with the English. Our borough, our town. See that town hall of ours? See its pathetic wee lawns, so comfortable, so respectable, with all these shrubs and flowers? See the wheezling councilman, alderman, deputy mayor. Smell the sweat that pours out of him and his cronies gathering here. The brass band, with its selection of easy listening, uncool tunes from The Sound of Music, fairly hits you in the ear. Arthur Rimbaud, back in the late 19th century, would not have heard of something called The Sound of Music, so I'm taking some liberties. Tunes from The Sound of Music fairly hits you in the ear. The town toy boy is looking very smug, sitting on the Conservative Party's widow woman's knee. Gossipy, effeminate men go tut-tut whenever there's a bum note, a wrong note from the brass band. The chief citizens of the town, with their fat women folk, ingratiate themselves, suck up to every toffee-nosed, snobbish, posh guy whose money goes in the same direction as his vote. The local Freemasons, or what we call our mafia, none of them would miss the chance to do some dodgy, shady business on the side. Backhanders, dirty deals, it's called enterprise. You'll catch them whispering to each other, I'll tell you this. One fat, greasy creature spreads his ass wide. The bench fairly creaks as he goes on with his bullshitting. This foreign stuff I've got will make a bomb, make a lot of money. I've slipped it past customs with my duty-free allowance. A gang of young troublemakers, maybe frat boys, looks on and takes the piss. As Edelweiss is barfed out by the band, some softies take their girlfriends by the hand, offer a rose in exchange for a kiss. Well, you'll not catch me being as soppy as that. Behind these trees, there's promise of a quick fuck. Never a lack of girls, both nubile and horny. You see it in their eyes and the way they dress. I don't say a word. From off their skin, a mixture of sweat and perfume gives me the hots. I hope to Christ they won't mind my spots. I'll chat them up for a while, then get stuck in. And here it is in Scots. Our borough, from the French of Arthur Rimbaud. See them tun hussours, see its wee bit greens, that snod, that deuce, with all the shrubs and flowers. See the wheezling biley body, smell the sweet that pours out of his cell and his foregathering friends. The breast bond with its potpourri for the sound of music, fair dunce your lug. The tune gigolos looking unco smug, sitting on the Tory widow woman's knee. Sweetie wife tut whenever there's a bum note. High Hegians with their bawsy women folk sook up to ilka toffee-nebbit gowk who siller gangs the same gate as his vote. The lodge, the mafia, none of them would miss the chance to do some troke up on the side. Backhonders, fiddles, enterprise, it's cried. You'll catch their bit collogue, I'll tell you this. One creasy crater spreads his arse a gee. The big fare creaks as he gangs bumming on. This foreign stuff I've got, oh macaboom! Slipped it through customs with my duty free. A gang o' Neds looks on and tacks the piss. As Edelweiss is puked out by the bond, some softies tack their lasses by the hand, offer a rose in exchange for a kiss. You'll no catch me at sick like sappiness. A hent they trees, there's heft a hook my gandy. Never a want of birds both ripe and randy. You see it in their een and who they dress. I didn't say a word. For off their skin, a mix of sweet and scent gives me the hots. I hope to Christ they winna mind my spots. I'll chat them up a while, they get stuck in. The next poem is based on an old German legend. I've also come across a Scottish version of this story, and I would be interested to hear of any American versions. So if this rings any bells, if you know an American version of this story, please let me know. What happens is this. There's this rich aristocratic lady in olden times in Germany who has died from the plague. Her husband, her lord, freaks out. Come, he says, lay my bonny bride to rest, still with her wedding ring on her finger. How romantic. Tam, or Tom, Tam is Scots version of the word Tom. So back home in Scotland, I'm called Tam. Tam, the gravedigger, spies the gold ring. Poor soul, his clothes are manky. You've got that word manky. Means that he's dressed in rags that are disgusting and smelly. So he chops off the dead woman's finger, puts the shroud by, and without saying please or thank you, he wraps this bleeding chunk, the finger, he wraps it in his snotty hanky, his handkerchief, which is full of the contents of his nose. You seem to know what the word snotty means. This is actually one of my grossest poems, though I go in for a lot for gross and grotesque stuff. This poem was actually commissioned by an editor who wanted to put together an anthology of poems for kids. Now, I don't know about kids in America, but kids in Scotland like gross stuff, and we were asked to write the grossest poems we could possibly think of, so this was my effort. Anyway, he wraps this chopped off finger in his snottery hanky. Jesus Christ, Tom, the lady's awake! He drops the ring as he flees. Oh, I'm sore, I'm aching, says the revived lady. I'll not take any more of this. Let someone else do all this dying. So her lord, her husband, hangs poor Tom instead. The lady, and I'm not lying to you, went on to give birth to 7 beautiful children, and their fingers came to a total of 63. When our Lady Richmodus died of the pest, her lord fared went his dinger. Come, lay my bonny bride to rest, with my wedding ring I on her finger. Tam the grave-howker spies the gowd. Poor soul, his duds were manky. Chaps off the finger, puts by the shroud, and without a please or thank ye, rats the bleeding chunk in his snottery hanky. Good sakes, cries Tam, the lady awakes. He drops the ring and fleeing. Sir, groans the lady, I'll tak nae mair. Let someone else do all this deeing. Say her lord stretched out our Tam instead. The lady, nae word o' a lee, 7 braw bairns gaed on to breed, and their fingers numbered 63. So that poem is also teaching the kids mathematics. They're never going to forget what 7 times 9 makes. The next poem is the title poem of the Chagall Winnicks. Chagall was a Russian Jewish artist who emigrated and eventually settled in the south of France. And this poem came about after I had given a guest lecture at the University of Mainz in Germany. And they were showing me around this very picturesque, photogenic city of Mainz. And I was taken to a church there. And I was shown in the church stained glass windows, which had been designed by Marc Chagall. I brought along some samples of just the kind of stained glass windows that Chagall created for a number of churches and synagogues across the world. Interesting that he was doing stained glass windows for churches as well as synagogues as a Jewish artist. Now, I was told that this church that these windows appeared in had been bombed during the Second World War by the Allies, and it was being restored. Restored sometime in the 1960s, when Germany was really sort of beginning to get itself together again. And I was so moved that this Jewish artist, when you think about what happened to the Jews in Germany during the war, that this Jewish artist, Marc Chagall, had been commissioned to play a big role in the restoration of that German church. Now, it's interesting that what Chagall does with the colour blue, you think about what we associate with the colour blue. Well, what do you guys associate? What's the characteristics of the colour blue in your minds? Yeah.
Sadness.
Sorry?
Sadness. Blue. Sadness.
Sadness, yeah. Mm-hmm. Anything else? Blue? What's that?
Water.
Water, right. Okay. What about coldness?
Yeah.
Blue's supposed to be a cold colour. Well, I got the feeling, seeing these stained glass windows, that Chagall does something miraculous with the colour blue, and that's really what this poem's about. Interesting to know that Chagall almost reached the age of 100. I think he was 98 when he died, and he was still working on his paintings and on his stained glass windows well into his 90s. The Chagall windows in St. Stephen's Church in Mainz, starting with the English again. A gaping shell of stone, 30 years after the bombs, transformed by Marc Chagall, laughing through his long years. A Levantine chronicle, he takes subject matter from the Eastern Mediterranean, from the Old Testament. The humour of a picture book, a fellow upon a camel, a woman with her jug, and there in front of the well, enhaloed by leaves and domes, Isaac and his Rebecca enjoy their tete-a-tete. The church is on a brow, the head of a slope that slopes down to the Rhine. Over there, the sun makes way, breaks the Germanic mist, shines gleaming through stained glass that the master's dominant blues are the warmest of all colours. The Chagall Winnox in St. Stephen's Kirk, Mainz. A Ganton shell of stain, 30 year after the bombs, transformed by Marc Chagall, laughing through his long years. A Levantine chronicle, the humour of a picture book, a chiel upon a camel, a woman with her jug, and there, fornent the well, enhaloed by leaves and domes, Isaac and his Rebecca enjoy their tete-a-tete. The kirk's upon a brew that slopes down to the Rhine. O'er there, the sun makes way, bracks the Germanic haar, sheens leaming through stained glass that the maester's dominant blues are the warmest of all hues. Comic poem again. This one's based on a Swiss folk ballad. It's not really a translation in any strict sense. I've embellished the original. I've got rid of its somewhat innocent tone, so it's a bit of a travesty of the original. It's a fable. It's the story of the marriage of an emmet, an ant. An emmet is the Scots word for an ant, and a grasshopper, an accident involving a thistle, and the appearance on the scene of a horny gollach, an earwig. Do you know what earwigs are? Do you have earwigs? Yeah, these rather nasty little things with sort of, you want to, you treat these guys with a certain amount of respect, you steer clear of them. So horny gollach is the Scots word for an earwig. The fact that the Scots word for an earwig is horny gollach is entirely coincidental to the story. The Ant and the Grasshopper. There was a Mr. Grasshopper who dated Ms. Ant. Each one sought to impress the other, for insects too are biochemical in nature. The ant, she's a smart one, asked the grasshopper, "Will you marry me?" "Yes, why not?" is his answer. "I'm a fine figure of a fellow, I am." That posh hotel in the mountain bids them welcome, but that's not the whole of it. The grasshopper jumps too far, and then, upon the thistle he's impaled. You should have heard the way that she, the ant, freaked out. This terrible misfortune had fairly shocked her. So she's over the lake, and before dawn she's going to fetch some big shot of an insect doctor. It was April when she set out, but she wasn't back until December. Her doctor busied that corpse about that fate had so dreadfully dismembered. And that was it. Fate, nothing more, was this great doctor's diagnosis. Our aunt wept. "It's not fair. I'm all alone. How hard my loss is. A widow. I'm a widow, but I'm still a young lass. No more this weary world I would." Oh, let's end this story on a high note, in the arms of Dr. Horny-Golloch, the hunk earwig. The emmet and the gressleiper. There was een meester luik the gress, who took to winchen meestress emmet. Elk in the other sought to impress, for insects too are biochemic. Zim, 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 zim. The emmet, she's a flying on, spears the gressleiper. "Will you add me?" "Aye, what for no," is his repone. "I'm a fine figure o' a lad, me." Zim, 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 zim. Thon posh hotel upon the bed bids welcome, but thon's no the hale o' it. Gressleiper loups our for, and then upon the thistle he's impale it. Zim, 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 zim. You should have heard her carry on. The sair Miss Hunter had fair shocked her. She's o'er the loch, and o'er the dawn she'll fetch some big braw insect doctor. Zim, 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 zim. It was the April she set out. She wasn't back until December. Her doctor bizzed on corp about that fate so sairly could dismember. Zim, 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 zim. And that was it. Fate, naething mair, was this great doctor's diagnosis. Our emmet grat. "It isna fair. I'm all my lane, who hoard my losses." Zim, 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 zim. "A widow, but young lass forby. Nae mair this weary world I'd crawl." Och, let's end her story on a high, in the arms o' Dr. Horny-Golloch. Zim, 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 zim. The last poem from the book is it's another ballad. It's a translation from the great Hungarian modernist poet Endre Ody, which is spelled A-D-Y, who lived from 1877 to 1919. Like so many modernists at the beginning of the 20th century, Endre Ody embraced both the avant-garde and ancient tradition. And it's the fusion of these opposites is the mark of much of the modern movement. So he went back to the great tradition of the old Hungarian ballads, and he made them new. It was a great cry of Ezra Pound and the modernists, "Make it new," but drawing on ancient tradition. This ballad is about a young Hungarian princess who refused to marry any of the suitors who were chosen by her father, the king. And so, because she wouldn't do as she was told, he had her sent to an isolated convent for the rest of her life, effectively imprisoning her on an island in the middle of the Danube. The English first. The Legend of the Lady Margaret. "The long island on the river yielded to me its soft-toned secret. The king cast into the cloister there his daughter, the Virgin Margaret. A girl of dreams and muffled screams, a swear word, a cuss word would make her faint. So these lords who rampaged through the court were no fit company for a saint. She sought her lover from out west, not the rough type with a hairy ass. He'd be a pale, sensitive lad. He'd be a pale, sensitive lad who would weep while singing his own verse. She waited painfully. It gripped her heart. There came brave horsemen with their off-colour jokes, galloping right into the hall, but not her long-expected guest. He would never wander by that shore. His rhymes and kisses she would never know. She died a sacrifice to Christ on the Long Island in the river. And here's the Scots version. The Legend of the Lady Margaret. The Long Island in the river yielded to me its saft-toned secret. The king kissed into the cloister there his daughter, the Virgin Margaret. A lassie o' dreams and muffled screams, a sweary word would gar her faint. Their lords that rampaged through the court were nae fit company for a saint. She sought her lover for out west, no the rough type with hairy erse. He'd be a peely-wally lad and greet while singing his ain verse. She waited sair. It gripped her heart. There came brave horsemen, course and jest, galloping richt into the hall, but no her lang-expected guest. He wadna wander beyond shore. His rhymes and kisses she'd ken never. She died a sacrifice to Christ on the Long Island in the river. So from Hungary, we go further east to Ukraine and to my novel, Marie B. Could we have her painting? Yeah. I'll explain what this means. Marie B., which is also on sale here, is based on an actual person, Marie Bashkirtsev, who was a painter, a diarist, and a feminist who lived from 1858 to 1884. She died at the age of 26. She was a perpetual outsider. She was born in Ukraine, but lived most of her life in France. She was an aristocrat, a posh person, who wanted to paint scenes of working class life in Paris. How could she, as an outsider? She was a woman artist at a time when painting was assumed to be an all-male activity. And this is very much germane to the plot of the novel. And what about her ethnic identity? How far was she Ukraine? Ukraine at that time was part of Greater Russia. So, maybe she was Russian. Or was she French by upbringing and residence? Even the very spelling of her name is fraught with ambiguity. The French have a way of transliterating Russian, Ukrainian names and words into the Latin alphabet. The French would transliterate a Russian or Ukrainian name ending with a fifth sound with a double F, E-double-F. Whereas, strictly speaking, in Ukrainian and Russian, you really ought to translate that more grammatically, EVA. So Bashkirtsev with the double F, as it would be spelt by the French, or Bashkirtsieva, which would be a much more correct Ukrainian, more Ukrainian, more Russian, more Slavonic way of transliterating her name. So just what exactly is her very name? So that was one reason for the title Marie B, to preserve that sense of uncertainty. How did I come to write this? Well, I saw this painting in Nice, in the art gallery in Nice, just at the end of my spell of teaching Scottish literature at the University of Grenoble in the south of France. And I spent some time just exploring the south of France once I'd graded all my exam scripts. Yes, it was that time of the year. And in the art gallery, I saw this painting, and I was drawn to it by the sense of tragedy in the expression, in the eyes. You know, I just couldn't resist finding out more about this painting and who painted it. So I found that it was by Marie Bashkirtsev, who had died at the age of 26, and indeed the label said that she painted this picture, this self-portrait, within a few months of her death. So I was hooked. This is long before the internet, so I couldn't download anything about her. It was back in the early 90s. There wasn't a postcard, no book or anything in the museum that I could buy. And it was a year later when my first stint of working at Yukon and browsing in the art library that it came to me. I'll write a novel about her. I'm not an art historian, but I will write a novel about this interesting lady. So the first extract is the opening chapter. Here's Marie. She's a young girl growing up as an émigré Ukrainian aristocrat in the south of France, in Nice. She's desperately seeking freedom. She's challenging the constraints of being a young woman of the upper classes, against being chaperoned all the time, against being sheltered. She really wants to spread her wings. So we see her here in this first chapter, spoiled, capricious, flirtatious. She's very charming, but she's clearly got a lot of growing up to do. She's just a teenager. But also, in this chapter, we see her as the future artist. She's using her eyes. She's perceiving stuff. She's taking it all in for possible future use when she becomes a painter. Unexpectedly, the sea was now turbulent. Unconcerned, the young girl raised her white skirts and bounded up the steps to the top deck. Her chaperone followed, less energetically, if no more sedately, and muttered incomprehensible protests as she clutched first one railing, then another. The girl opened her arms, swirled around the deck, enraptured. I want to be part of all this. I want all this to be part of me. The older woman puffed. Mademoiselle, please, you will make a spectacle of yourself. No, I won't. The other passengers are too busy being sick. But these young men are looking at you. Now let them. Am I not to be admired? The chaperone resumed her muttering, gestured with all fingers, a mistake, for she lost her balance, almost failing to flop down upon the nearest seat. The girl strode across the deck. As she passed, an elaborate youth raised his cane to his lips. The boat lurched, and he chipped a tooth. The girl laughed, gazed across to the nearing shore. She wondered at the texture of the cliff, which seemed not so much carved as piled with large brown and grey boulders. Counterpointing the irregular upper reaches of this frontage, there ran neat terraces built of flesh-tinted bricks. To and fro strolled the ladies and gentlemen of the city. If they looked out at sea from time to time, they glanced not at all at the boats approaching the harbour. This high promenade was located at the extremity of Montbaron. Two trees, two only, and at an interval from each other, rose from the topmost terrace, punctuating its wide curve of yellowish gravel. Crisscrossing this expanse were a pair of children, a boy and a girl, playing at tig, pursued by their nurse. This anxious person struggled with her parasol and her bonnet. Beyond the terraces there spread a rich lawn, disrupted by outcrops of rock, and on the highest point was perched a building in mock medieval style, curiously turreted and crenellated. The weather suddenly calmed, and a ray of sun struck the varying pinks of the Paradis Castle. From the deck of the pleasure steamer came a cry of delight. It was the young woman in white. She was enjoying her life, and her chaperone couldn't understand why. From another part of the deck came gasps of horror and indignation. A trio of middle-aged Italian women, obviously from steerage, from the lower decks, had stolen up to the deck and had begun to dance. They'd been drinking and had linked their arms, not so much for choreography as for mutual support. The girl and her chaperone heard complaints that these persons had probably embarked at Ventimille and had overcome potentially obstructive officials by means of judiciously paced flirtation. The eldest possessed few teeth, but was able to offset this by still eminently fulsome lips. As their dancing and giggling became increasingly frenetic, the three appeared all the sweatier and wrinklier and more predatory. The pallid young men, mostly English or American, balked nervously at the invitations invitations to join these sudden southern revels. Marie B., the young woman in white, observed the various groupings and formations that were achieved or attempted. Her amusement was evident in the lower half of her face and in the small gloved hand raised to her mouth, but her eyes were quizzical, piercing, intense. Her concentration remained unbroken, even when the legitimate passengers recoiled from a brusque affront by the toothless dancer. Stunned to content by the elaborate young man and his rejection of her advances, the Italian made an obscene sign. Members of the crew, hastily summoned, grabbed the three women and pushed them below. Very shortly, these ripe sirens would find it needful to exercise their charms on the harbour police and on those officers charged to escort them, none too gallantly, to the frontier. Marie didn't lose a single gesture of the whole drama. She didn't even hear her chaperone vigorously assessing the scandalous nature of the scene and the outcome, if any, of a complaint to this clearly corrupt and indolent steamship company. So that's the south of France. The next extract, the scene changes completely. She's returned to her native land, Ukraine, for a short stay with her wealthy landowner father, who's separated from her mother. She's grown up with her mother in Nice, but she's going back to stay some time with her father, and with her brother, who also lives on the estate in Ukraine. Well, she loves both her father and her brother, but she feels herself superior to both of them. She regards her father and brother as idle, degenerate, not as serious about things as she is. There's a lot of banter between them. It's during this brief visit that Marie is shocked into growing up. She undergoes a series of experiences that act as wake-up calls, rites of initiation, if you like, epiphanies. And here's one of them, an experience of the landscape itself, which begins by not being very pleasant. She's just encountered some peasants in the local village. She's seen their degradation at first hand for the first time in her life, seeing how the other half lives. She cast a pile of coins behind her, and the people scrambled upon the ground. She continued her way through a field and into a forest. Birds chirped as she followed the up and down path. It was sunny and pleasant at first. 10 minutes later, the path was obscured by fallen branches. The earth was sodden, with a layer of mist above it. A bit like today here. Something appeared to be watching her through the undergrowth. It was moving. With the fascination of those suddenly attracted to danger, she tramped closer to the figure. It was a tall cross and seemed to lurch towards her as if it were yet another beggar seeking alms. Where the eyes would be, there were white things crawling. She shrieked. She stumbled upon the overturned markers of graves. The name boards had rusted and rotted away from their posts. Some would still have been decipherable, but most of the lettering had either been eaten away or was obscured by dark, spreading stains. It was as if cancerous tumours persisted in mocking and murdering the dead. In the darker corners of this abandoned sepulchre, there were spots of phosphorescence, and there was a smell suggesting the imminent eruption of the horrors below. The neglected grave seemed to become more densely packed as she made her uneasy progress through the wood. The tumuli appeared to swell in the mist. It was as if the very guts of the earth would burst before collapsing in on itself, sucking in all objects and creatures lacking a secure hold on the surface. Marie took a handkerchief from her bosom and covered her face. She soon felt, though, that she needed to have both hands free should she fall in this terrible place. She froze. From a heap of logs there glistened and slithered a reptilian shape. Are they poisonous in the Ukraine? She asked herself, stupidly. Its liquid movement did not, however, turn threateningly in her direction. There was a trickling, melting sound, almost risibly high-pitched. She tripped and fell in the mess. Her screams echoed through the wood. Then a ray of sun lit up the scene. Gigantic, obscene fungi were clustered around her, swaying in their impertinent ascendancy and decay. Tumescent, bulbous, or in pleated curtain-like folds, they cast their spores into the mean air. They would all end up as the black, clammy stuff which stuck to Marie's clothes and fingers. She followed the rays as if they were noble liberators. Another path appeared. She had no idea whence it had come or whither it was going, but it promised escape from all that dreadful momentary life which battened upon death. Emerging from the ghastly forest, Marie sensed that her whole being was polluted. She needed not so much a bath as a baptism. The ground rose in a series of knolls, and in one of their dips she found a small pool, not fresh, but not quite stagnant, because of the tiny stream running through. She immersed as much of herself as was possible in the shallows. She dared not strip, but cast water over both skin and clothes. At times she became frustrated at the stubbornness of the filth upon her. She ground her teeth, wept. How dare this happen to her? The stains and the odour were by no means removed, but at least she felt a little better after her quasi-ablutions. The ground levelled out. She found herself on a wide plateau, and the beauty of her native land was there before her. Her tears were the gentle ones of a being first awed, then subdued. Irregular patches of field and forest stretched below and beyond. The sun picked out threads of river, as well as the domes and spires of distant churches. She knelt, kissed the ground. Well, suitably matured by her experiences in Ukraine, she returns to France and devotes herself to learning how to become a painter at one of the art schools, one of the very few art schools in Paris that actually admitted women students. So she works hard. Something of the spoiled brat is still there, but the dedicated artist is now gaining ground. She's got to come to terms with the fact that the other art students in the school might be just as good as she is, maybe even better. But that just makes her all the more determined to do well. She's also got to learn how to relate to the working class models in the studio, and indeed her fellow students from the working class. She makes friends with one of them, Georgette, whose rough, down-to-earth attitudes are just what Marie needs to take into account, both for her personal and artistic development. Because it's Georgette, that working-class woman, that fellow student of hers, who will help Marie break out of her sheltered upper-class restrictions, who will take her round the rougher parts of Paris, so that Marie will be able to incorporate all that into the subject matter of her paintings, as here. In these last two extracts, we switch to first-person narration. She wins a prize for one of these paintings, and here it is. It's called Le Meeting. She gave it an English title, Le Meeting, of these a group of little boys up to no good. We don't know what they're doing. They're plotting something. You don't see it on this reproduction, but there's a little girl at the side here, a wee lassie, a wee girl who's walking away in the opposite direction, as good young ladies should. She doesn't want to have anything to do with these with these boys. So she wins a prize for this painting, but her success does not excite her. The judges at the Salon, the annual art competition in Paris, they're all men, and she feels patronised, especially when it becomes clear that she would not have won the prize if the judges had known that she was a woman. She had signed the painting M. Bashkirtsev. It's just down here. It's just off the reproduction here, but the signature is down here. M. Bashkirtsev, not Marie Bashkirtsev. And the judges assume that the M stands for Monsieur, Mr. So again, this weird confusion about her name. So this is Marie herself writing. The meeting received an award, but not the medal which it deserved, and which, as it turned out, the public demanded for it. Still, it was feted with remarkable volubility by the stuffy professors, those generals in the army of art who condescend to the ranks. I bowed, was terribly shy. Their enthusiasm turned to what appeared to be outrage. A woman, damn it! We've given the prize to a woman! My God! Suddenly they all appeared to resemble my father. I had to restrain myself from grabbing a pencil and any old piece of paper lying around. A leaf torn from their precious catalogue would have done nicely. A crowd of my fathers. In their murmurs, I heard nervous confessions of the follies of their youth, their heroisms which had collapsed ignominiously into farce. I saw them divest their top hats and frock coats. I saw their quivering nakedness, the folds of belly, the sweaty dangling genitals. I burst out laughing and fled from that grand room, that salon which is supposed to be the space of aspiration for all good little artists. So she just can't face all the ceremony, all the pomposity of the prize giving at the salon. She tries to find a way out of the salon building, but ends up in a small conservatory. It's such a big building, just like a university building. She can't find the exit. So she finds herself in this conservatory. Now, for a long time, she's desperately wanted to meet her hero in the art world, a painter called Jules Bastien Lepage. He's 10 years older than her. A painter who had already built up quite a strong reputation throughout Europe and also in this country, in America. Bastien Lepage, despite his fame, was an unassuming fellow, a guy who painted the life of French peasants because he was himself a French peasant. Marie has long wanted to paint the urban working class in the way that he, Bastien Lepage, painted the rural workers. She regards Bastien Lepage as a mentor, and she would so love to actually meet him. In this conservatory, she suddenly comes across a wee man who's sitting there. They get into conversation. He's very shy, and that just provokes her into mildly flirting with him. Then she gets a better look at him. When he emerged from behind the palm, I felt guilty at my raillery. He was small with a round face, not unbecoming, but not especially becoming either. The hair was neatly cut. Is this, I thought, what one of their country priests looks like? The moustache was wispy, and I wondered if he were capable of growing a beard. But what eyes! The darkness there that could both absorb and radiate an uncanny light. His jacket, which was faded, lent him a weird blend of absurdity and dignity. All the buttons were fastened. He bowed, clumsily enough, but not without a certain naive charm. I knew that I must not hurt this man for all the world. He must have been struggling valiantly with his shyness, for he came right out with, you are the artist of Le Meeting, mademoiselle. Yes, I am. I am sorry for my performance in there. I shut up because I realized he couldn't have been at the scene in the jury room. I'd have noticed him, even in that crowd. They thought the work was by a man. Well, this was becoming more interesting by the minute. Did they now, monsieur? I regretted my tone, but he was becoming bolder, and I couldn't help admiring him for it. I heard them say, who is this Monsieur Bashkirtsev? Strong stuff, they said. This Monsieur Bashkirtsev paints strong stuff. I had signed it, M. Bashkirtsev. They had clearly taken the M of Marie to be Monsieur. Then the little man before me, the bashful bumpkin in his tight-fitting jacket, really astonished me. It's by a lady, I told them. No, they said, it's by you, monsieur. It's your style. The impudent brats of the gutter, they said. You go in for that sort of thing. I replied that, unlike the artist of Le Meeting, I don't know the poor of the city. I know only the poor of the villages and the farms. They said, come, monsieur, don't give us that. Le Meeting is by your good self, monsieur, but what an outlandish name you choose to sign it with. You're playing tricks, monsieur. That's what they said to me. But I humbly apologize, mademoiselle. I shouldn't be blathering like this. I'm very sorry. No. This is so funny. These old fellows addressed you as monsieur, but monsieur what? since you are clearly not Monsieur Bashkirtsev. I enjoyed that thrust. Monsieur Jules... Ah, another Monsieur B. I'm Bastien Lepage. When I had recovered, I started to laugh. I shouldn't have done that, but my emotions were veering off in all directions. Well, Monsieur Jules Bastien Lepage, my pleasure. And I have to confess to you that I am indeed Monsieur Bashkirtsev. He doesn't know how to take me, this poor soul. I must behave myself, only I didn't. But I don't like the French form of my name. I shouldn't have said that, for he began to stammer. He believed that he had offended me. I must make all well, or he would rush from this courtyard, make for the exit, and I'd never see him again. Bashkirtsieva, Maria Konstantinovna Bashkirtsieva. It's a proud name, a stirring name, but jerky and fretful. Oh, dear monsieur, I'm not very French after all. Mademoiselle, perhaps it is possible sometimes to be too French. I could see we were going to get on very well. He was speaking a language that was not his own. It was too refined for him, and yet now and then there would emerge a quiet elegance that didn't sound in the least pretentious. I couldn't resist one riddle for him. The mystery remains, however, monsieur. How could they think the meeting was by you when it was signed by that elusive Monsieur Bashkirtsev? Have you been using my name, you rogue? And have I been using yours? He didn't laugh at this. I didn't expect him to laugh. But he was not offended. The poor dear could not possibly be offended by anything that I or anyone else might say. He merely blushed. Ah, yes, we shall get on very well indeed. So he allowed me to approach the exit first, and he manfully followed. Yes, approaching the exit. Who goes first through the exit? So a relationship of sorts develops between the two painters, but it emerges that they're both mortally ill. They'll both die young. He, Jules, at 36 from stomach cancer, and she, Marie, at 26 from tuberculosis, within 2 months of each other. The question is, which of them will die first? Which of them will go through the exit first? The climax of the whole novel takes place in a large park, a landscape garden in a suburb of Paris. This chapter begins in a leisurely manner as Marie and Jules take a rare break from their art. They've been working especially hard at their painting because they know that time is running out for both of them. So, a quiet stroll, leisurely as I say, but the chapter does not end in a leisurely fashion. The crisis, when it comes, is a sudden one, and the rest of the story moves inexorably to the final tragedy. Although hopefully there's still enough comedy and absurdity in my novel Marie B. to act as a counterfoil to the tragedy that, as I say, will follow. Thank you.